The mysterious deal. Jake Harper had lived a life of solitude on the cold, rocky asteroid belt of Sector 42. As a human miner, he spent his days digging through the endless void, hoping to uncover rare treasures buried in the asteroid's core. It was a lonely existence, but Jake was used to it. His ship, an old battered mining vessel, was his only companion. The hum of its engines was the only sound he had grown to rely on in the vast silence of space. One evening, as Jake sat sipping a lukewarm cup of synthesized coffee, his ship's AI suddenly alerted him. Unidentified vessel approaching. The monotone voice announced. Jake frowned. Visitors were rare out here. Most stayed far away from these desolate rocks. He quickly activated the external cameras, and his jaw tightened as he saw the ship. It was sleek, black, and unlike anything he had seen before. The design was alien, smooth, and seamless, with glowing blue lights pulsing along its surface. Before Jake could decide whether to hail the ship or prepare for an attack, a deep, resonant voice crackled through his comms. "Human miner," the voice said. "I am Xerox. I seek an audience with you." Jake hesitated. An audience? What could an alien possibly want with a lone miner? He took a deep breath and replied, "You've got 5 minutes. State your business." Moments later, Xerox materialized in Jake's docking bay. The alien was tall, his metallic silver skin reflecting the dim lights of the ship. His eyes glowed faintly, and his movements were unnervingly fluid. Jake could feel the weight of Xerox's gaze as the alien stepped forward, a calm but commanding presence filling the room. "I come with a proposition," Xerox said, his voice steady but cold. Jake crossed his arms, leaning against a console. "I'm listening." Xerox wasted no time. "You recently unearthed an artifact during your excavation on asteroid Theta 12. I know this because its signal resonated across the sector." Jake's stomach tightened. He knew the artifact Xerox was referring to, a small black cube he had found just days ago. It had given off a strange pulse when he touched it, showing him a fleeting vision of planets engulfed in flames. He had locked it away, unsure of its true purpose. "What's it to you?" Jake asked, trying to mask his unease. Xerox's expression remained unreadable. "That artifact is of great importance to my people. I am here to retrieve it. In return, I offer you something far more valuable." Jake raised an eyebrow. "And what might that be?" The alien's lips curled into what might have been a smile. "My wife." Jake blinked, sure he had misheard. "Your wife?" Xerox nodded, his tone unchanging. "Her name is Lyria. She is a being of immense knowledge and beauty. She will serve you well." The room fell silent. Jake stared at the alien, trying to process what he'd just heard. Was this some kind of joke? But Xerox's expression was deadly serious. "I'm not interested in owning anyone," Jake said firmly. "What kind of man do you take me for?" Xerox's glowing eyes narrowed. "This is not about ownership. Lyria is not a possession. She is my partner, but she has agreed to this arrangement. She understands the importance of the artifact." Before Jake could argue further, the doors to the docking bay slid open, and a figure stepped inside. It was Lyria. She was unlike anything Jake had ever seen. Her skin shimmered like liquid gold, and her eyes held a depth that seemed to pierce through him. She moved gracefully, each step deliberate and calm. "You must be Jake Harper," she said, her voice soft yet commanding. "It is an honor to meet you." Jake didn't respond immediately, still grappling with the absurdity of the situation. Finally, he managed, "I don't understand any of this. Why would you agree to something like this?" Lyria glanced at Xerox, then back at Jake. "There are things you do not yet understand, human. The artifact you possess is more dangerous than you realize. If it falls into the wrong hands, it could destroy entire civilizations." Jake's eyes narrowed. "And you think giving me your wife will make me hand it over?" Xerox stepped forward, his towering frame casting a shadow over Jake. "This is no ordinary deal. Lyria will ensure your survival. There are those who will come for that artifact, and they will stop at nothing to take it from you. She will protect you, guide you, and in return, you will give me what I need." Jake's mind raced. The weight of the artifact, the visions it had shown him, the strange energy it gave off, it all suddenly felt far heavier. And now he was being thrust into a situation far beyond his understanding. Lyria stepped closer, her golden eyes meeting his. "This is no small decision, Jake Harper, but it is one you must make." The miner clenched his fists, his mind torn between distrust and curiosity. "Give me time to think," he finally said. Zarok nodded, but his gaze was sharp. "Do not take too long, human. Time is not on your side." As the alien turned and left the room, Lyria lingered for a moment, her expression unreadable. Jake could feel the storm brewing around him. Whatever he chose, there was no going back. A wife like no other. Jake Harper couldn't sleep. The dim glow of his ship's control panel illuminated the small, cluttered cabin where he sat, staring at the black cube in his hands. The artifact, smooth and cool to the touch, hummed faintly as if alive. He had a bad feeling about it. But now, he had an even worse feeling about the deal Zarok had offered. Who offers their wife to a stranger? His thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock on the cabin door. He frowned. He wasn't expecting visitors. Then again, nothing about this situation was normal. The door slid open, and Lyria stepped in. She was even more striking up close. Her golden skin shimmered faintly in the dim light, and her movements were graceful yet deliberate, like a predator sizing up its prey. "You're troubled," she said, her voice calm but piercing. "I can sense it." Jake leaned back in his chair, studying her. "You think? Your husband shows up out of nowhere, offers you up like some kind of trade. And now I'm stuck in the middle of a situation I don't understand. Yeah, I'm troubled." Lyria's expression remained neutral, but there was a flicker of something in her eyes. Pity, perhaps, or understanding. She walked over to the small viewport, gazing out at the asteroid field beyond. "Zarok's actions may seem strange to you, but he is not an ordinary being. Neither am I," she said, her tone steady. "Our ways are different from yours. You see this as a betrayal or a sacrifice. But in our culture, such arrangements are strategic." Jake scoffed. "Strategic? You're telling me you're okay with being handed over to some random guy because your husband wants a shiny cube?" She turned to face him, her golden eyes narrowing slightly. "Do not misunderstand me, human. I am no victim. I agreed to this, but not for the reasons Zarok might have you believe." Jake sat up straighter, his interest piqued. "Then why? What's really going on here?" Lyria hesitated for a moment, as if weighing how much to reveal. Finally, she said, "The artifact you possess is not just a relic. It is a key, an ancient device created by a race long extinct. It has the power to bend minds, to control entire populations. Zarok seeks it for his own purposes. He says it is for the greater good, but I no longer trust his vision of what that good entails." Jake's grip tightened on the artifact. "And you think I'm the better choice? I'm just a miner, lady. I dig rocks. I'm not some hero." Lyria stepped closer, her gaze intense. "That is precisely why you are the better choice. You are not consumed by power or ambition. You live simply, seeking only what you need. That makes you different." Jake shook his head, feeling the weight of her words. "Different doesn't mean capable. If this thing is as dangerous as you say, why not just destroy it?" Lyria's expression darkened. "Because destruction is not so simple. The artifact cannot be broken by conventional means. And even if it could, the energy it would release could devastate entire star systems. The only way to neutralize its power is to unlock its true potential. And to do that, someone must understand its secrets." Jake ran a hand through his hair, frustration bubbling to the surface. "And you think that someone is me? I don't even know what this thing does, let alone how to use it." She placed a hand on his shoulder, her touch surprisingly warm. That is why I am here. I will guide you, teach you. Together, we can ensure that the artifact does not fall into the wrong hands." Jake looked into her eyes, searching for any hint of deceit, but all he saw was determination, and something else he couldn't quite place: trust, hope. Before he could respond, the ship's alarm blared, jolting them both. The AI's voice cut through the noise. Unidentified ships detected. Multiple vessels inbound. Lyria's calm demeanor vanished, replaced by urgency. "They found us," she said, her voice sharp. "Zarok must have alerted them. They're here for the artifact." Jake jumped to his feet, adrenaline surging. "Who's they?" "Ravagers," Lyria replied, already moving toward the control panel. "Mercenaries who will stop at nothing to retrieve what you have. We need to leave. Now." Jake cursed under his breath, grabbing his gear and heading for the cockpit. "This just keeps getting better and better," he muttered. As the ship rumbled to life, Jake felt a strange mix of fear and resolve. He didn't trust Zarok, and he wasn't sure he trusted Lyria either. But one thing was clear: whatever he had gotten himself into, there was no turning back now. The Ravager's ships appeared on the radar, closing in fast. Jake gripped the controls, his heart pounding as Lyria stood beside him, her golden skin glowing faintly in the dim light. "You wanted to know why I agreed to this," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos. "It's because I believe in you, Jake Harper. You may not see it yet, but you have a strength that no one else does. And we're going to need it." Jake glanced at her, unsure whether to feel flattered or terrified. The ships were closing in, and the fight for survival was about to begin. "Well," he said with a grim smile, "let's hope you're right." The artifact's power. The ship rattled violently as Jake Harper steered it through the asteroid field. The Ravagers were relentless, their sleek, predator-like vessels darting between the rocks, firing bursts of energy that lit up the void. Lyria stood beside him, her golden skin shimmering faintly under the flickering cockpit lights. "We can't keep this up much longer," Jake yelled over the alarms blaring around them. Lyria's voice was calm but urgent. "Head toward the Denkar Nebula. The radiation will disrupt their targeting systems." Jake gritted his teeth, yanking the controls hard to the left. "Nebula. That's a death trap. We won't last 5 minutes in there." "Better 5 minutes in the nebula than 5 seconds in their crosshairs," she shot back, her tone leaving no room for argument. Jake sighed and adjusted the course. The glowing haze of the Denkar Nebula loomed ahead, a swirling mass of crimson and gold clouds charged with volatile radiation. The ship's AI chimed in with a monotone warning. "Entering hazardous zone. Structural integrity at risk." "Noted." Jake snapped, sweat beading on his forehead. As they plunged into the nebula, the ship's lights flickered, and the controls grew sluggish. Outside, the Ravager's ships faltered, their shots going wide as the nebula's radiation scrambled their systems. "It's working," Lyria said, her golden eyes scanning the sensors. "But it won't hold them off for long. We need a plan." Jake glanced at the artifact, now resting on the console. Its black surface seemed to pulse faintly, as though alive. "What about this thing? Can it help us?" Lyria hesitated, her expression unreadable. "The artifact's power is unpredictable. If we activate it, there's no telling what might happen." Jake frowned. "Unpredictable how?" She stepped closer, her gaze fixed on the artifact. It was created by the Dranik, a race that mastered technologies beyond comprehension. They used it to unify their kind, to bring order to chaos. But that power came at a cost. The artifact feeds on the mind of its user, amplifying their will. But if the mind is weak or untrained, it can destroy them. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. "And you're telling me this now?" "You weren't ready to hear it before," Lyria said bluntly. "But if we don't use it, the Ravagers will capture us, and Zarok will get what he wants. We have no choice." Jake stared at the artifact, his gut churning. He didn't want to touch it again, not after the vision it had shown him the first time. The endless void, the planets consumed by fire. But as the ship shuddered under another near miss, he realized there was no other option. "Fine," he said, picking up the cube. It felt heavier this time, its surface warmer. "What do I do?" Lyria placed her hands over his, guiding him. Her touch was steady, reassuring. "Focus. Clear your mind of doubt and fear. The artifact responds to intent. Think of what you need most right now." Jake closed his eyes, his breathing uneven. He thought of survival, of escape, of breaking free from the Ravagers, and this nightmare he'd been dragged into. The artifact began to hum, a low, resonant sound that vibrated through the ship. Suddenly, a burst of energy erupted from the cube, washing over the cockpit in a wave of blinding light. The ship's systems surged to life, and Jake's mind was flooded with images, maps of the nebula, paths through the asteroid field, and the positions of the Ravager ships. "I can see them," he whispered, his voice trembling. "I know where they're going to be." Lyria smiled faintly. "The artifact is enhancing your awareness. Use it." Jake gripped the controls, his movements precise and confident. He guided the ship through the nebula, weaving between the asteroids with uncanny accuracy. The Ravagers, disoriented and outmaneuvered, fell behind, their ships struggling to keep up. But the strain was taking its toll. Jake's vision blurred, and his head throbbed as the artifact's energy coursed through him. This thing is too much," he gasped. Lyria placed a hand on his shoulder, her voice firm. "Stay focused. Jake, you're stronger than you think." With a final burst of effort, Jake guided the ship out of the nebula. The Ravager's ships, unable to match his daring maneuvers, were left behind, their signals fading from the radar. The cockpit fell silent except for the hum of the ship's engines. Jake slumped back in his chair, the artifact slipping from his hands. He felt drained, as though he'd run a marathon in zero gravity. "You did it," Lyria said, her tone almost gentle. Jake managed a weak smile. "Yeah, barely." She picked up the artifact, studying it with a mixture of awe and caution. "You've proven you can wield it, but this was only the beginning. The artifact is powerful, but its true potential remains untapped. If we're going to survive what's coming, you'll need to learn to master it." Jake groaned, rubbing his temples. "Great. Just what I needed, artifact lessons." Lyria's expression softened, and for the first time, Jake thought he saw a hint of genuine admiration in her gaze. "You did well, Jake Harper. Better than most would have." Jake leaned back, staring at the stars ahead. The danger wasn't over. Zerak was still out there, and the artifact's secrets were far from uncovered. But for now, he allowed himself a moment of relief. "Let's just hope I survive long enough to figure this thing out," he muttered. Lyria didn't respond, but her silence spoke volumes. The road ahead would be perilous, and they both knew it. But for the first time, Jake felt a spark of hope. Whatever lay ahead, he wasn't facing it alone. The escape plan, the adrenaline from escaping the Ravagers, had barely faded when Jake Harper found himself face to face with a new problem. Trust. As the battered mining vessel drifted through a quiet stretch of space, Jake leaned against the control panel, studying Lyria. She was seated across the room, her golden skin catching the faint glow of the artifact, which now sat dormant between them. "All right," Jake said, breaking the silence. "You've got my attention. But I still don't get it. If this thing is so dangerous, why not just leave it behind and let someone else deal with it?" Lyria's gaze was steady, her voice calm. "Because leaving it behind would be a death sentence. Zerak won't stop hunting you, and neither will others who know what it is. The artifact isn't just a tool, it's a beacon. Its energy calls out to those who seek power." Jake sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "So what's your plan?" "Keep running until Zerak gets tired." Lyria tilted her head slightly, a faint smile tugging at her lips. Zaruck doesn't get tired, Jake Harper. He gets smarter. If we're going to survive, we need to outthink him. And that means taking the fight to him before he gets the chance to strike. Jake blinked. Take the fight to him? Are you serious? I'm a miner, not a soldier. She stood, her movements fluid and deliberate, and approached him. You may not see it yet, but you have strength, Jake. You've already proven it. You wielded the artifact and survived. That's more than most could accomplish. Jake shook his head, but her words stirred something in him. He didn't feel strong, but he couldn't deny that he had done things in the past few days he never thought himself capable of. Still, the idea of going after Zaruck felt like suicide. Fine, he said reluctantly. Let's say I go along with this. What's step one in your grand plan? Lyria's expression turned serious. We need allies, and I know where to find them. Jake raised an eyebrow. Allies? Out here. She nodded. There's a group of exiles on a nearby moon, beings who oppose Zaruck and his vision. They'd been hiding for years, waiting for a chance to strike back. If we can reach them, they might help us. Jake wasn't thrilled about the idea of trusting more aliens, but he didn't see many other options. And how do you know they'll help us? For all we know, they might just turn us over to Zaruck. Lyria's golden eyes met his, unwavering. They won't, because I used to be one of them. Jake froze, the weight of her words sinking in. You used to be. What? One of the exiles. She nodded, her voice softer now. Before Zaruck and I were bonded, I fought against his rise to power. I believed in the exiles' cause. But when Zaruck promised to bring peace through unity, I thought he could be different. I was wrong. Jake studied her, trying to gauge her sincerity. There was a vulnerability in her voice that hadn't been there before, a hint of regret. He wanted to ask more, but the ship's AI interrupted his thoughts. Incoming transmission. Priority signal. Jake and Lyria exchanged a glance. Let's hear it, Jake said. The screen flickered to life, revealing a holographic image of Zaruck. His silver skin gleamed under the harsh light of his ship, and his glowing eyes burned with cold intensity. Jake Harper, Zaruck said, his voice steady but laced with menace. I see you've chosen to keep the artifact. A bold choice, but a foolish one. Jake clenched his fists. What do you want, Zaruck? What I've always wanted, Zaruck replied. The artifact belongs to my people. Hand it over, and I will allow you and Lyria to live. Defy me, and you will face the consequences. Lyria stepped forward, her tone defiant. Your promises mean nothing, Zaruck. You've already betrayed your people. Why should we trust you? Zaruck's gaze shifted to her, and for a moment, his expression softened. Lyria, my bondmate, you misunderstand me. I only wish to save our kind. The artifact is the key to uniting the galaxy, to bringing order to chaos. Can you not see the wisdom in that? Lyria didn't flinch. I see only your ambition, Zaruck, and I won't be a part of it. Zaruck's expression hardened. Then you leave me no choice. I will find you, and when I do, I will take what is mine. The transmission ended abruptly, leaving the cabin in tense silence. Jake exhaled sharply. Well, that was uplifting. Looks like we're on borrowed time. Lyria nodded. Then we need to move quickly. The exiles will be our only chance. Jake hesitated, but the determination in Lyria's voice was infectious. He wasn't sure if he trusted her completely, but for now, they were in this together. All right, he said, setting the ship's coordinates for the moon she had mentioned. Let's go find your friends. As the ship powered up and the stars blurred into streaks of light, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into a trap. But for now, all he could do was keep moving forward and hope for the best. The betrayal. The barren moon hung against the velvet backdrop of space, its surface a jagged maze of craters and dark crevices. Jake Harper piloted the mining ship down with cautious precision, his every nerve on edge. Beside him, Lyria stood silent, her golden skin dimmed as if the tension around them weighed her down. "You sure about this?" Jake asked, breaking the silence. Lyria nodded. "They will listen to me. They must." Jake wasn't convinced. The exiles she spoke of were supposedly freedom fighters, but in his experience, people desperate enough to call themselves rebels were often just as dangerous as the ones they opposed. As the ship landed with a soft hiss of hydraulic steam, Jake grabbed his pistol from the console, tucking it into the holster at his side. "Better safe than sorry," he muttered. Lyria glanced at the weapon but said nothing. Together, they stepped onto the moon's dusty surface, their boots crunching against the rocky ground. The air was thin but breathable, the faint whistling of wind the only sound. In the distance, a jagged canyon marked the entrance to the exiles' hidden base. "This way," Lyria said, leading him toward the canyon. Jake followed, every step amplifying his unease. The narrow path wound downward, the walls of the canyon closing in around them. He kept his hand near his weapon, eyes scanning the shadows for any signs of movement. Finally, they reached a large rusted door embedded in the rock face. Lyria placed her hand on a panel beside it, and after a moment, the door slid open with a metallic groan. Inside, the base was a stark contrast to the desolation outside. It was dimly lit but bustling with activity. Dozens of beings, humanoid and otherwise, moved through the cavernous space, their faces etched with determination and weariness. Makeshift workstations hummed with activity, and the air buzzed with the low murmur of conversation. As Jake took it all in, a tall figure emerged from the crowd. He was an imposing alien with deep red skin and sharp angular features. His piercing black eyes locked onto Lyria immediately. "Lyria," the alien said, his voice deep and resonant. "You've returned." Lyria inclined her head. "Rohak, it's been a long time." Rohak's gaze shifted to Jake, his expression unreadable. "And you've brought a human." "This is Jake Harper," Lyria said. "He possesses the artifact." The murmurs in the room grew louder at her words, and Jake felt the weight of countless eyes on him. He stiffened, his hand inching toward his pistol. Rohak's expression darkened. "You brought the artifact here. Do you have any idea what you've done?" Lyria stepped forward, her voice firm. "We had no choice. Zaruk is hunting us, and the artifact is the only thing standing between him and total domination. We need your help." Rohak studied her for a long moment before sighing. "Come with me." They followed him deeper into the base, passing through a series of tunnels until they reached a large chamber. In the center was a table covered with maps, holograms, and scattered notes. Rohak gestured for them to sit. "Explain everything," he said. Lyria recounted their journey, the artifact, Zaruk's pursuit, and their narrow escape from the Ravagers. Rohak listened intently, his expression grim. When she finished, he leaned back, his gaze heavy with concern. "You've put us all in danger. If Zaruk knows the artifact is here, he will stop at nothing to find it." "That's why we need to act first," Lyria said. "With your forces and the artifact, we can launch a preemptive strike. Take the fight to Zaruk before he has a chance to strike back." Rohak hesitated, his eyes narrowing. "And how can we trust you, Lyria? You left us to join Zaruk once before. How do we know you won't betray us again?" The accusation hung in the air like a blade, and for a moment, Lyria looked genuinely hurt. "I made a mistake," she said softly. "But I see the truth now. I'm here to make things right." Rohak's gaze flicked to Jake. "And you? Do you trust her?" Jake hesitated, then nodded. "I don't know if I trust her completely, but right now, she's the only one who seems to know what the hell is going on. That's good enough for me." Rohak seemed to consider this, then stood abruptly. "Very well. We'll help you. But if this goes wrong, it's on your heads." Relief washed over Jake, but it was short-lived. As they were escorted to a makeshift barracks to rest, He couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Later that night, Jake awoke to the sound of hushed voices outside his room. He crept to the door, listening closely. "Are you sure it's wise to trust her?" a voice whispered. "We don't have a choice," came another reply. "But keep an eye on her and the human. If they falter, we'll deal with them." Jake's stomach turned. He slipped back into the room, his mind racing. Were they walking into a trap, or was the paranoia getting to him? He glanced at the artifact, its faint hum filling the silence. Whatever happened next, he knew one thing for sure. Trust was a luxury he couldn't afford. The shocking twist. The base buzzed with activity as the exiles prepared for the assault on Zarok's fleet. Maps and holograms projected trajectories and battle formations onto every available surface. Jake Harper stood near the artifact, his unease growing with every passing minute. He still wasn't sure how he had gone from a lone miner to a key player in an intergalactic rebellion. Across the room, Lyria and Rohak were locked in conversation. Their voices were low, but their expressions were tense. Jake couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't being said aloud. "You're brooding again," Lyria said as she approached him, breaking his train of thought. "I'm not brooding," Jake replied. "I'm just trying to figure out how I became the galaxy's most wanted miner." Lyria's lips twitched in a faint smile. "Fate works in strange ways. But you're more than just a miner, Jake. You've proven that already." Jake shook his head, glancing at the artifact. "I don't feel like a hero. I feel like a guy who's in way over his head." Before Lyria could respond, Rohak's voice boomed across the room. "It's time. Everyone to the briefing chamber." The exiles gathered in a large underground chamber, the walls lined with weapons and tactical displays. Rohak stood at the front, his imposing figure casting long shadows under the dim lights. "Our scouts have confirmed Zarok's fleet is moving toward this sector," he announced. "They'll arrive within hours. If we strike first, we can catch them off guard and cripple their forces." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Jake glanced at Lyria, who nodded subtly. She seemed confident, but Jake's instincts told him something was off. The plan was set. Jake, Lyria, and a small strike team would infiltrate Zarok's flagship while the exiles engaged the rest of his fleet. The goal was simple: destroy the flagship's command core and sever Zarok's control over his forces. As they prepared to leave, Jake found himself alone with Lyria in the ship's loading bay. She was checking her equipment with practiced efficiency, but her movements seemed stiffer than usual. "You okay?" Jake asked. She hesitated, then nodded. "I'm fine. Just focused." Jake studied her for a moment. "You sure? You've been acting a little off ever since we got here." Lyria looked at him, her golden eyes flickering with something he couldn't place. "There's something I need to tell you, Jake. Something I haven't been completely honest about." Jake's stomach tightened. "What is it?" She took a deep breath. "The artifact. It's not just a key. It's a test. It was designed to choose a worthy wielder, someone strong enough to resist its influence and use its power for good. Zarok believes he's that person, but he's wrong. And so am I." Jake frowned. "What do you mean wrong?" "You said the artifact responded to me." Lyria stepped closer, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "It did, but not because it chose you. It chose us, together. The artifact only works when two minds are perfectly aligned, when trust and intention are shared. That's why Zarok wanted me to bond with you. He thought I could manipulate you into unlocking its full power for him." Jake staggered back, his mind racing. "So this whole thing was a setup. You were working with Zarok." Lyria's expression was pained. "At first, yes, but I didn't expect you to be you. I didn't expect to see the strength in you, the integrity. That's why I turned against him." Jake stared at her, his anger boiling beneath the surface. "And now what? You expect me to just trust you after all that?" Lyria met his gaze, her voice steady. "I don't expect anything, Jake. But if we don't work together, Zarak will win, and everything we fought for will be lost. The mission began in tense silence. The strike team boarded a stealth shuttle, their faces grim as they approached Zarak's flagship. Jake sat beside Lyria, the weight of her revelation pressing down on him. He didn't know if he could trust her, but he didn't have a choice. As they breached the flagship's hangar, alarms blared, and Zarak's soldiers swarmed to intercept them. The exiles engaged them in fierce combat, clearing a path toward the command core. Jake and Lyria led the charge, the artifact pulsing faintly in Jake's hand. The closer they got to the core, the stronger the artifact's energy became, as if it were guiding them. Finally, they reached the core chamber. It was a massive cylindrical room filled with glowing machinery and pulsating energy conduits. At the center stood Zarak, his silver skin gleaming under the harsh light. "You've come far, Jake Harper," Zarak said, his voice echoing through the chamber. "But this is where it ends." Jake raised the artifact, his grip steady despite his fear. "Not if I can help it." Zarak smiled coldly. "You think you can stop me? You're a mere minor. The artifact belongs to me." Lyria stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. "You're wrong, Zarak. The artifact doesn't belong to anyone. It chooses." Zarak's eyes narrowed. "And it will choose me." As he lunged toward them, the artifact flared to life, flooding the chamber with blinding light. Jake felt its energy surge through him, and for a moment, he wasn't alone. Lyria's presence was there, her thoughts and intentions merging with his. Together, they directed the artifact's power, unleashing a wave of energy that sent Zarak sprawling. But as the light faded, Jake realized the battle was far from over. Zarak rose to his feet, his eyes glowing with rage. "You think this is over? You've only delayed the inevitable." Jake tightened his grip on the artifact, his resolve hardening. "Then let's finish it." A new alliance. The command core was a smoking ruin, sparks flying from shattered consoles, and conduits that hummed like broken bones. Zarak's flagship shuddered violently, alarms blaring as explosions rippled through its hull. Jake Harper stood at the center of the chaos, clutching the artifact, its dark surface pulsing faintly in his hands. Across from him, Zarak lay crumpled on the floor, his once imposing frame battered and charred. "It's over," Jake said, his voice steady despite the turmoil around him. Zarak's glowing eyes flickered, his lips curling into a defiant sneer. "You think you've won, human. You've merely delayed the inevitable. Others will come for the artifact. You've made yourself a target, a pawn in a game far greater than you understand." Jake tightened his grip on the artifact. "Maybe, but at least I won't be playing by your rules." Before Zarak could respond, the ship lurched violently. Lyria, who had been standing beside Jake, staggered but quickly regained her footing. She glanced at the ruptured walls, where sparks flew like wild fireworks. "The flagship's core is destabilizing," she said. "We need to leave. Now." Jake hesitated for a moment, his gaze lingering on Zarak. The alien's eyes locked with his, hatred and something else. Regret, flickering in their depths. Then, without a word, Jake turned and ran, Lyria close behind him. The corridors of the flagship were a chaotic maze of collapsing walls and panicked soldiers. Jake and Lyria pushed through the chaos, dodging falling debris and evading enemy fire. The artifact seemed to guide them, its faint hum aligning with Jake's instincts, leading them toward the hangar bay. As they reached their shuttle, the Exiles strike team was already waiting, their expressions grim but determined. Rohak approached them, his crimson skin streaked with soot. "The fleet's in disarray," he said. "We've dealt them a serious blow, but we need to retreat before this ship takes us down with it." Jake nodded, climbing aboard the shuttle. "Let's move." The shuttle roared to life, lifting off just as the flagship's hangar bay collapsed in a cascade of fire and twisted metal. As they soared away, Jake watched through the viewport as the massive ship imploded, a brilliant explosion illuminating the dark void. One less problem, Jake muttered, though the weight of the artifact in his hands reminded him that the fight was far from over. Back on the Exile's moon, the atmosphere was a mix of relief and unease. The destruction of Zaruk's flagship was a significant victory, but the cost was evident in the exhausted faces of the survivors. Jake and Lyria sat in a quiet corner of the base, the artifact resting between them on a makeshift table. Its faint hum was the only sound in the room. "So what now?" Jake asked, breaking the silence. Lyria leaned back, her golden eyes thoughtful. "The artifact's power is still untapped. We've only scratched the surface of what it can do. If we can learn to control it, we might have a chance at uniting the galaxy. On our terms, not Zaruk's." Jake raised an eyebrow. I thought you said the artifact needed perfect alignment between two minds. Are you saying you still trust me?" She smiled faintly. "You've proven yourself, Jake Harper. You may not see it, but you have a strength that even Zaruk feared. And as much as I hate to admit it, I can't do this without you." Jake sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Great. No pressure or anything." Before Lyria could respond, Rohak entered the room, his expression grim. "We have a problem," he said. Jake groaned. "Of course we do. What now?" Rohak placed a small holographic device on the table. Activating it, a map of the galaxy appeared, with several glowing red dots scattered across it. "These are distress signals from nearby systems," Rohak explained. "Zaruk wasn't lying. Others are coming for the artifact. Mercenaries, warlords, even remnants of the Dranic Empire. They all want it." Jake stared at the map, the enormity of their situation sinking in. "So we're back to being targets." Rohak nodded. "The difference now is that we know what we're up against, and with the artifact, we might just have a fighting chance." Lyria stood, her expression resolute. "Then we prepare. The galaxy needs a new alliance, one built on trust, not fear. If we can rally others to our cause, we can turn the artifact into a weapon for peace." Jake laughed bitterly. "Peace? With this thing? Feels like a long shot." Lyria placed a hand on his shoulder, her gaze steady. "Maybe, but it's a shot worth taking." Jake looked at her, then at the artifact. He didn't know if he believed in peace, or if he even believed in himself. But as he stared at the glowing map, he realized one thing. He was tired of running. "All right," he said, standing up. "Let's give them hell." The story ends with the exiles rallying their forces, the artifact glowing faintly as Jake and Lyria step into their new roles as unlikely leaders. The galaxy remains a dangerous, fractured place. But for the first time, there's a glimmer of hope.